The morning dew clung to the stone walls of Rosenhill Castle like tears of heaven, glistening in the pale light of dawn. Cecilia Winfield knelt among the herbs in the hidden corner of the castle courtyard, her slender fingers working through the soil with practiced care. The scent of rosemary and lavender filled the air as she gently pruned the plants, her movements as graceful as the noble lady she was raised to be. Few knew of this secluded garden tucked behind the great oak and surrounded by weathered stone walls. It had been her mother's before her, and Cecilia had spent the 7 years since her mother's passing nurturing it to even greater beauty. Among the kitchen herbs and medicinal plants grew rare blooms from distant lands, smuggled in by friendly merchants who knew of Lady Cecilia's passion. "My lady," came a soft voice. Cecilia looked up to see Agnes, her handmaiden, standing at the garden's entrance, her woolen kirtle dusty from the morning's chores. "My lady, your father requests your presence in the great hall. The royal party approaches." Cecilia sighed, brushing the soil from her hands onto her simple linen apron. "How long until they arrive?" "The scouts say an hour, perhaps less." Rising to her feet, Cecilia nodded. "I shall come directly. Have a bath prepared, please." As Agnes hurried away, Cecilia cast one last glance at her sanctuary. This garden had been her refuge, the one place where she could escape the confines of court life and the weight of her father's expectations. Now, with King Edward's royal entourage approaching, she feared her peaceful hours would become scarce. Lord Edmund Winfield paced before the great hearth, his heavy velvet robe swirling about him with each turn. At 60 years, the Lord of Rosenhill Castle still cut an imposing figure, his grey beard neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Father," Cecilia greeted him with a curtsy as she entered, her hair freshly braided and adorned with silver pins, her blue gown simple but elegant. "Daughter," he acknowledged, his voice warming slightly. "The king approaches with his court. Among them is Sir Thomas Rothwell." Cecilia felt her heart quicken. The king's champion. The very same. The man who single-handedly broke the siege at Dunbrook. Lord Edmund studied his daughter's face. "He is of noble birth, wealthy lands, and the king's favour. And he has expressed interest in seeing you again." "Again?" Cecilia questioned, her brow furrowing. "I do not recall meeting Sir Thomas." A rare smile crossed her father's stern face. "You were but 12 summers when he visited last. He was a squire then, accompanying his father. Now he returns a knight of great renown." Cecilia nodded, understanding what remained unsaid. At 21 years, she had rejected 3 suitors already. Her father's patience grew thin. "I shall greet him with all courtesy," she promised. "See that you do more than that," Lord Edmund replied. "The alliance with the Rothwells would strengthen our position considerably. King Edward values Thomas above all his knights. A favourable match would ensure Rosenhill's place at court for generations." As trumpets sounded from the watchtower, announcing the approach of the royal party, Cecilia felt a familiar weight settle upon her shoulders. She was a noble daughter, and her duty was clear, regardless of her heart's desires. The great hall of Rosenhill Castle echoed with laughter and music as the feast to welcome King Edward stretched into the evening. Tallow candles and rushlights cast a warm glow over the trestle tables where nobles supped on roasted swan, venison pies, and fresh bread still warm from the castle ovens. Cecilia sat at the high table beside her father, watching the festivities with outward calm while her thoughts tumbled like leaves in an autumn wind. Across from her sat Sir Thomas Rothwell, the king's champion. He was not what she had expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, yes, as befitted a knight of his renown, but his face bore a gentleness that belied his fearsome reputation. His chestnut hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and his beard was neatly trimmed. It was his eyes that captured her attention most, green as summer leaves and thoughtful as he observed the hall. "Lady Cecilia," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear him over the minstrel's song. "I'm told the gardens of Rosenhill are without equal in the kingdom." She inclined her head. "They are modest, sir, but we take pride in them." "Would you show them to me on the morrow?" he asked. "I confess a weakness for growing things. My own estate at Ashcroft boasts an orchard that produces the sweetest apples in the Shire." Cecilia studied him, searching for signs of mockery or mere courtly flattery, but found only genuine interest. "I would be honored, Sir Thomas." He smiled then, a smile that reached his eyes and transformed his solemn face. "Call me Thomas, I pray you. We are to be friends, are we not?" Before she could respond, King Edward called for Sir Thomas's attention, drawing him into conversation about the coming tournament. Cecilia turned to her wine cup, her mind awhirl. This knight was not the brash warrior she had imagined, but a man who spoke of orchards with fondness. Perhaps her father's machinations would not be so difficult to bear after all. As the evening wore on, Cecilia noticed a servant slip quietly into the hall and approach Sir Geoffrey Marsh, the king's adviser. The man bent to whisper in Sir Geoffrey's ear, and the adviser's face darkened like a storm cloud. He rose immediately and left the hall, followed by the servant. Curious, Cecilia excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. Once outside the great hall, she followed the sound of urgent voices to a shadowed alcove. "You're certain of this?" Sir Geoffrey was demanding. "I am, lord," the servant replied. "Found it hidden beneath the stones in the old chapel, just as the message said it would be." "And none saw you retrieve it?" "None, lord. I was careful, as you instructed." "Good. Speak of this to no one. The king must not know until we are certain." Cecilia pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. What had been found? And why must it be kept from the king? The voices fell silent, and footsteps approached. Thinking quickly, Cecilia moved to the center of the corridor and began adjusting her sleeve, as if it had come loose. Sir Geoffrey emerged from the alcove, starting slightly at the sight of her. "Lady Cecilia," he said, recovering quickly. "Are you well?" "Quite well, Sir Geoffrey," she replied with a practiced smile. The hall grew warm, and I sought a moment's respite. He studied her, his gaze calculating. "Indeed. The feast is magnificent, your father's hospitality is renowned throughout the kingdom." "You honor us with your presence," Cecilia responded, her tone carefully modulated to reveal nothing of what she had overheard. With a curt nod, Sir Geoffrey continued down the corridor, the servant following at a respectful distance. Cecilia waited until they disappeared from view before releasing the breath she had been holding. Something was amiss at Rosenhill, something significant enough to concern the king's closest adviser. And somehow, it involved the old chapel, a place Cecilia knew well, for it adjoined her secret garden. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Cecilia rose early, her night's sleep disturbed by dreams of shadowy figures and whispered secrets. She dressed simply in a green gown with a plain linen underveil, eschewing the elaborate headpieces that had become fashionable at court. As promised, she met Sir Thomas in the outer courtyard after breaking her fast. He too had chosen simple attire, a tunic of fine wool over linen trousers, his only concession to his station being the gold cloak pin bearing his family's crest. "Lady Cecilia," he greeted her with a bow. "You look as fresh as May morning." "Sir Thomas," she returned with a smile. "I trust you slept well." "Better than in many months," he admitted. "The road from London is long, and the king's business keeps a man from his rest." They walked side by side through the main gardens, where kitchen servants harvested vegetables for the midday meal. Thomas asked intelligent questions about the cultivation of certain plants, displaying a knowledge that surprised her. "You know much of gardening for a knight," she observed as they passed the herb beds. He laughed, a pleasant sound that warmed her more than she cared to admit. "My mother was an herbalist of some renown. When other boys were playing at swords, I was often pressed into service digging beds and harvesting seeds." "And now you wield a sword with the best of them," Cecilia said. "The tales of your victory at Dunbrook have reached even our remote corner of the kingdom." A shadow passed over his face. "Tales grow in the telling, my lady. There was little glory at Dunbrook, only men doing what must be done." The pain in his voice silenced her questions. Instead, she guided him toward a small gate nearly hidden by a sprawling rose bush. "Few know of this place," she said, unlocking the iron gate with a key she kept at her belt. "It was my mother's garden, and now it is mine." As they stepped through the gate, Sir Thomas's breath caught audibly. The walled garden was in full bloom, a riot of colour and fragrance. Roses in shades from palest pink to deepest crimson climbed the ancient stones. Herbs grew in careful patterns, their scents mingling in the morning air. At the centre stood a small fountain, its gentle splash creating a melody of peace. "It's magnificent," Thomas whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "Like something from a troubadour's tale." Pride warmed Cecilia's cheeks. "It is my refuge," she admitted. "When the demands of court and castle grow too great, I come here to find peace." Thomas moved to a cluster of unfamiliar plants with small purple flowers. Lavandula, he identified, rubbing a leaf between his fingers and inhaling the scent. "From Provence, if I'm not mistaken." "How came you by it?" "Such plants are rare in England. A merchant from Venice brings me seeds and cuttings," Cecilia explained. "In exchange for certain medicinal preparations I create from the plants here." Thomas looked at her with new respect. "You are an herbalist, like my mother." It wasn't a question, but Cecilia nodded. "My mother taught me, and I have studied old texts and learned from village wise women. Though I must be discreet, some find such knowledge unsuitable for a lady of my station." "Knowledge is never unsuitable," Thomas said firmly. "My mother saved more lives with her herbs than I ever will with my sword." The sincerity in his voice touched her. They continued through the garden, speaking of plants and growing things, finding unexpected common ground in their shared knowledge. As they approached the far wall, Cecilia noticed Thomas's gaze drawn to the small chapel that adjoined the garden. "That is the old chapel," she explained. "Built by my great-grandfather before the newer one was constructed in the main courtyard. It is seldom used now, save for private prayers." Thomas nodded, but his eyes lingered on the chapel door. "Does anyone tend it?" he asked casually, too casually, Cecilia thought. "The castle chaplain sees to it occasionally," she replied, studying his face. "Why do you ask?" "Mere curiosity," he said, turning back to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Shall we continue our tour? I believe you mentioned a knot garden beyond the kitchens." As they walked away, Cecilia felt certain that Sir Thomas Rothwell's interest in the chapel was far more than casual curiosity. Combined with the strange exchange she had overheard the night before, it seemed the old chapel held secrets that concerned both the king's champion and his advisor. And Cecilia Winfield was determined to discover what they were. That night, after the castle had fallen quiet, Cecilia slipped from her chamber, a small oil lamp lighting her way through the darkened corridors. She had dismissed Agnes earlier, claiming fatigue from the day's activities, but sleep was far from her mind. Wrapped in a dark cloak, she moved silently, her soft leather shoes making no sound on the stone floors. She knew every passage of Rosenhill Castle, having explored its confines since childhood. The guards at their posts paid her little heed. The lord's daughter was known to seek the kitchens for late-night morsels. But it was not the kitchen she sought tonight. Making her way through the servants' passages, she emerged into the cool night air of the courtyard. The moon was nearly full, bathing the stone walls in silver light. Keeping to the shadows, she approached her garden gate and unlocked it with practiced ease. The garden was transformed by moonlight, the flowers closed in slumber, the herbs releasing their scents into the night. Cecilia moved swiftly past them to the small door that connected the garden to the old chapel. This door was rarely used, its existence nearly forgotten by most of the castle's inhabitants, but Cecilia had discovered it years ago during her explorations. The key turned with a protesting creak, and she winced at the sound. Pushing the door open just enough to slip through, she entered the chapel. Inside, darkness reigned save for the thin shafts of moonlight that penetrated the narrow windows. Cecilia raised her lamp, its small flame illuminating ancient stone walls and worn wooden pews. The air smelled of dust and old incense, undisturbed for months. What had Sir Geoffrey's servant found here that was of such importance? And why had Sir Thomas shown such interest in this forgotten place? Moving carefully, Cecilia examined the chapel. The altar stood bare except for a tarnished silver cross. The floor was simple flagstone, worn smooth by generations of kneeling worshippers. Nothing seemed amiss or out of place. She was about to turn her attention to the small sacristy when a sound froze her in place, the unmistakable creak of the chapel's main door opening. Quickly dousing her lamp, Cecilia pressed herself into the shadows behind a pillar. Heavy footsteps echoed in the chapel, followed by the glow of approaching lamplight. Holding her breath, she peered around the pillar. Sir Thomas Rothwell stood in the center of the chapel, his lamp held high, surveying the space with keen eyes. He wore a simple tunic and breeches, his sword belted at his waist. He moved with purpose to the altar and knelt before it, running his hands over the stone base. For several moments he searched, his movements growing increasingly frustrated. Then, with a sigh, he sat back on his heels. "I know you're here," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "You may as well show yourself." Cecilia's heart hammered in her chest. How had he known? Had she made some sound, or was he merely guessing? When no response came, Thomas rose to his feet. "I mean no harm," he continued. "But I must find what was taken from this place. It is a matter of grave importance to the king." The mention of the king decided her. Stepping from behind the pillar, Cecilia revealed herself, her chin held high despite her racing pulse. "Sir Thomas," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It seems we both have questions about this chapel." His surprise was evident, quickly replaced by a rueful smile. "Lady Cecilia, I should have known it would be you. You strike me as a woman who notices much." "I notice when the king's champion shows unusual interest in an abandoned chapel," she replied. "And when the king's advisor receives mysterious items recovered from beneath its stones." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You overheard Sir Geoffrey?" "Enough to know something was found here yesterday, something that concerns the king." For a long moment, Thomas studied her, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Then he sighed, gesturing for her to join him near the altar where his lamp cast a circle of light. "What I tell you must remain between us," he said gravely. "Lives depend upon it, perhaps even the king's." Cecilia nodded, her curiosity blazing like wildfire. "You have my word." 3 months ago, a document went missing from the king's private chambers, a treaty with France that contained sensitive terms. If it fell into the wrong hands, it could undermine the peace King Edward has worked years to establish. "And you believe this document was hidden here?" "In Rosenhill's chapel." Thomas nodded. "We received word from a spy that the thief had secreted it at Rosenhill, intending to retrieve it when the court moved north. The message specified it was hidden beneath the stones of the old chapel. I was sent ahead of the king's party to recover it discreetly. But Sir Geoffrey's man found it first," Cecilia concluded. "So it seems." Thomas's expression darkened. "Which raises troubling questions, for only the king, myself, and the Lord Chancellor knew of the message's contents." "You suspect Sir Geoffrey of treachery?" Cecilia asked, shocked. The advisor had served King Edward faithfully for 20 years. "I suspect everyone until the document is safely in the king's hands," Thomas replied. "Even you, my lady, though my heart protests the notion." A flush rose to Cecilia's cheeks at his words, but she pushed aside the feeling to focus on the matter at hand. "If Sir Geoffrey has the document, what do you intend to do?" "Discover his purpose," Thomas said grimly. "If he is loyal, he will present it to the king upon our return to London. If not—" He left the sentence unfinished, his hand moving unconsciously to the hilt of his sword. Cecilia considered this information, her mind working quickly. "Sir Geoffrey spoke to his servant in private, not knowing I overheard. He said the king must not know until we are certain. That suggests he may not be acting against the king, but perhaps independently of him." Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by her reasoning. "A fair point. But his secrecy troubles me nonetheless." "Then we must learn more," Cecilia said decisively. "Sir Geoffrey occupies the East Tower chamber. If he has the document, it will be there." "We?" Thomas questioned, his lips quirking in a half-smile. "Lady Cecilia, this is a matter of state security, not a game for noble ladies." Cecilia drew herself up to her full height, indignation flaring. This is my home, Sir Thomas. If treachery unfolds beneath its roof, I have every right to help uncover it. Besides, who would question my presence in the corridors, while a stranger like yourself would draw immediate suspicion? He regarded her thoughtfully, then inclined his head. Your logic is sound. But I would not place you in danger. I am merely gathering information, she countered. Once we know Sir Geoffrey's intentions, you may act as you see fit. After a moment's consideration, Thomas nodded. Very well. But promise me you will take no unnecessary risks. The king values this treaty greatly, but I would not see you harmed for it. The concern in his voice warmed her more than it should have. I shall be caution itself, she promised. As they left the chapel separately, returning by different paths to their chambers, Cecilia found herself thinking not of treaties and spies, but of the way Thomas Rothwell's eyes had softened when he spoke of his concern for her safety. Such thoughts were dangerous, far more dangerous than hunting for stolen documents. For her father's plans for her marriage were as immovable as the stones of Rosenhill itself, and her duty was clear. No matter what her heart might wish. The following days passed in a flurry of activity as Rosenhill Castle entertained its royal guests. A hunting party ventured into the forest, returning with deer and boar for the evening feasts. Minstrels performed in the great hall, and the king's fool drew laughter with his antics and clever wordplay. Through it all, Cecilia moved with the grace expected of her station, serving as hostess in her motherless household, ensuring the comfort of noble guests, and participating in the courtly entertainments. But her thoughts remained fixed on the mystery of the stolen document. She observed Sir Geoffrey closely during meals and gatherings. The king's adviser appeared no different than usual, serious, attentive to the king's needs, and cordial to his fellow courtiers. If he harbored treasonous intentions, he hid them well. On the third evening after her encounter with Thomas in the chapel, Cecilia found her opportunity. A great feast had been arranged in the king's honour, with entertainers brought from London specifically for the occasion. Sir Geoffrey, like all the court, would be in attendance, leaving his chamber unattended. While the nobles gathered in the great hall, Cecilia pleaded a headache and retired to her chambers. Agnes fussed over her, applying lavender-soaked cloths to her forehead and brewing a calming tea. I shall rest now, Cecilia told her maid after an appropriate interval. Go and enjoy the festivities in the servants' hall. I know you've been looking forward to hearing the king's minstrels. Agnes hesitated. Are you certain, my lady? I don't like to leave you unwell. I insist, Cecilia smiled reassuringly. The quiet will do me more good than any potion. Return after the feast to help me prepare for bed. Once alone, Cecilia quickly changed from her elaborate court gown into a simpler dress of dark blue wool. She braided her hair tightly and covered it with a plain linen veil. At a distance, she might be mistaken for a serving woman rather than the lady of the castle. The east tower where Sir Geoffrey was housed stood apart from the great hall, connected by a covered walkway. Cecilia made her way there by servants' passages, encountering few people as most were either attending the feast or watching the entertainments from the galleries. Sir Geoffrey's chamber door was locked, as she had expected. Drawing a slender iron tool from her sleeve, borrowed from the castle locksmith years ago and never returned, she set to work on the mechanism. It was a skill she had learned in secret, practicing on the various locks of Rosenhill until she could open most with ease. A noblewoman had no business possessing such knowledge, but Cecilia had always been curious beyond the bounds of propriety. The lock yielded with a soft click, and she slipped inside, closing the door carefully behind her. The chamber was spacious and well appointed, befitting the king's trusted adviser. A large bed stood against one wall, its hangings of fine blue damask. A writing desk occupied the window embrasure, covered with papers and writing implements. Cecilia moved swiftly but methodically through the room, searching for anything that might be the missing treaty. The papers on the desk were mundane: correspondence about estate matters, lists of supplies, notes on the progress of the royal progress. A chest at the foot of the bed contained clothing and personal items, but nothing of significance. Growing frustrated, she turned her attention to less obvious hiding places. Under the mattress, behind tapestries, within the leather bindings of the books stacked beside the bed, all yielded nothing. Then her eye fell upon Sir Geoffrey's travelling case, a wooden box reinforced with iron bands that sat in a corner. Unlike the rest of the room, which had been arranged with care, the case appeared to have been hastily placed, one corner not quite aligned with the wall. Kneeling beside it, Cecilia found it locked with a mechanism more complex than the door. She worked at it carefully, sweat beading on her forehead as the minutes ticked by. Just as she felt the lock begin to give, a sound from the corridor outside froze her in place. Footsteps approached the door, followed by the metallic scrape of a key. Panic surged through her as she realized she had no time to hide or escape. The door swung open, and Sir Geoffrey himself entered the chamber. He stopped short at the sight of her kneeling beside his travelling case, his expression shifting from surprise to cold fury in an instant. "Lady Cecilia," he said, closing the door behind him with deliberate calm. "This is an unexpected pleasure." Cecilia rose to her feet, mind racing. "Sir Geoffrey," she replied, straightening her shoulders. "I owe you an apology for this intrusion." "Indeed you do," he agreed, his tone dangerously soft. "Perhaps you might explain why the daughter of Lord Winfield is attempting to break into my personal belongings while dressed as a common servant." She had prepared no lie for this contingency, and in the moment of crisis, Cecilia chose the unexpected path of partial truth. "I know about the document taken from the chapel," she said, watching his face carefully. "The treaty stolen from the king's chambers." A flicker of surprise crossed his features before his expression hardened. "I see Sir Thomas has taken you into his confidence." "Unwise of him." "He believes you mean to betray the king," Cecilia continued, edging slowly toward the window. "But I am not convinced. If you are loyal to King Edward, why keep the treaty hidden instead of returning it immediately?" Sir Geoffrey studied her with calculating eyes. "Politics is a complex game, Lady Cecilia, with stakes higher than you can imagine. The treaty is safe enough where it is." "So you do have it," she pressed, her suspicion growing. "What do you intend to do with it?" "What I must," he replied cryptically. "As must we all." His gaze flicked to the door behind her. "And now I fear I must decide what to do with you." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Cecilia's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "My father would not take kindly to any harm befalling me. Nor would the king, who holds him in high regard." "Harm?" Sir Geoffrey smiled thinly. "Who speaks of harm? I merely suggest that perhaps you've been unwell of late. Confused, even. Speaking of treaties and chapels, making wild accusations against the king's adviser. A brief confinement might be best for your health, until the court departs Rosenhill." As he spoke, he moved toward her, his intent clear. Cecilia backed away, her mind working frantically. She needed to escape, to find Thomas or her father. "The king will know of your treachery," she said, playing for time. "The king knows only what his advisers tell him," Geoffrey replied smoothly. "And I have been his most trusted voice for 20 years. He lunged suddenly, reaching for her arm. Cecilia darted sideways, but the chamber offered little room for maneuver. Geoffrey's fingers closed around her wrist, his grip painful. "Come, Lady Cecilia," he said, his pleasant tone at odds with the cruelty in his eyes. "Let us find you a quiet place to rest until your mind clears." Desperate, Cecilia grabbed the nearest object, a heavy silver candlestick from the bedside table, and swung it with all her strength. It connected with Geoffrey's temple with a sickening thud. He staggered, releasing her wrist, his eyes wide with shock before rolling back as he collapsed to the floor. Cecilia stood frozen, the candlestick still clutched in her trembling hand. Had she killed him? Relief washed through her as she saw his chest rise and fall, unconscious, but alive. Knowing she had minutes at most before he awoke, she turned her attention back to the traveling case. With renewed urgency, she worked at the lock until it finally gave way with a soft click. Inside, nestled among clothing and personal items, she found a leather document case sealed with the royal crest. Opening it carefully, she discovered several sheets of parchment covered in neat script, bearing the signatures and seals of both King Edward and the French king. The treaty, just as Thomas had described. Tucking it securely inside her gown, Cecilia cast one last glance at Sir Geoffrey's unconscious form before slipping from the chamber. She needed to find Thomas immediately. The great hall hummed with laughter and music as Cecilia slipped in through a side entrance, her simple dress now covered by a cloak borrowed from a servant's peg. She scanned the crowded room, searching for Thomas among the gathered nobles. She spotted him standing near the king's table, deep in conversation with a knight she recognized as Sir Roland, another of the king's trusted men. Moving carefully through the crowd, she approached him from behind. "Sir Thomas," she murmured as she reached his side. "I must speak with you urgently." He turned, surprise registering in his eyes at her attire. "Lady Cecilia, I heard you had retired with a headache." "Please," she insisted, her voice low. "A moment of your time. It concerns our mutual interest." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Excusing himself from Sir Roland, he guided Cecilia to a relatively quiet alcove near one of the great hall's pillars. "What has happened?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that none could overhear. Quickly, Cecilia recounted her encounter with Sir Geoffrey, watching Thomas's expression darken as she described the advisor's threats. "He meant to confine me until the court departed," she concluded. "I struck him with a candlestick to escape." "You struck the king's advisor?" Thomas said, his tone caught between horror and admiration. "I had little choice," she replied defensively. "And I found this." She drew the document case from within her gown, handing it to him beneath the cover of her cloak. Thomas's fingers brushed hers as he took it, his touch sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the gravity of the moment. He opened the case just enough to confirm its contents before securing it within his own tunic. "You've done the king a great service," he said softly. "But Sir Geoffrey will soon rouse himself, and when he does, he will come looking for me," Cecilia finished grimly. "And for the treaty." Thomas nodded, his expression resolute. "We must act quickly. I need to get this document to the king immediately, but I would see you safely away from Geoffrey's reach first." "I can go to my father," Cecilia suggested. "Once he knows of Geoffrey's treachery, we cannot be certain it is treachery," Thomas cautioned. "Not yet. Geoffrey is powerful, with many allies at court. We must tread carefully until the king himself has reviewed the treaty and determined if it has been tampered with." A commotion at the hall's entrance drew their attention. Sir Geoffrey stood there, a hand pressed to his blooded temple, his eye scanning the crowd with murderous intent. Several guards stood beside him, alert and ready. "Too late for careful treading," Cecilia whispered. "He's here." Thomas's hand moved to his sword hilt. "Stay behind me. If he makes a scene, it will only draw attention to his actions. The king will want to know why his advisor is pursuing the daughter of his host with armed men." Geoffrey spotted them then, his eyes narrowing as he gestured to the guards. They began moving through the crowd toward the alcove. "Thomas," Cecilia said urgently. "There is another way out, through the kitchens. We can reach my garden from there, and the chapel beyond. There are passages beneath it that lead to the outer bailey." Without hesitation, Thomas took her hand. "Lead the way." They slipped through a small door used by servants to bring food and wine into the hall, emerging into the busy castle kitchens. Cooks and scullions moved about in organized chaos, preparing the next courses of the elaborate feast. In the commotion, no one paid much heed to the noble lady and knight passing through. From the kitchens, Cecilia led Thomas through a narrow corridor that opened onto a small courtyard, and from there to the gate of her private garden. The moon had risen, bathing the flowers in silver light as they hurried along the gravel paths to the chapel door. Once inside the chapel, Cecilia moved directly to the altar. "Help me move this," she instructed, placing her hands against the heavy stone. Together they pushed, the altar sliding with surprising ease to reveal a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. "The old crypt," Cecilia explained. "It connects to tunnels that were used during the border wars a century ago. My father showed them to me when I was a child, saying I should know all of Rosenhill's secrets in case of siege." Thomas looked at her with newfound respect. "You continue to surprise me, Lady Cecilia." A crash from the chapel entrance cut short any further conversation. Sir Geoffrey stood there, sword drawn, 2 guards flanking him. "The treaty, Sir Thomas," he demanded. "Return it to me now, and perhaps the king need not hear of your treasonous theft." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between Geoffrey and Cecilia. "The only thief here is you, Geoffrey. The treaty belongs to the king, and to the king it shall return." "You understand nothing," Geoffrey spat. "That treaty would bind England to ruinous terms. I sought only to protect the king from his own folly, to give him time to reconsider before the French envoys return." "That is not your decision to make," Thomas replied, drawing his own sword. The blade gleamed in the moonlight streaming through the chapel windows. "The king's will is the law of the land, even for his advisers." "Then you leave me no choice," Geoffrey said coldly. He turned to the guards. "Arrest Sir Thomas Rothwell and Lady Cecilia Winfield for theft of royal documents and assault upon the king's adviser." The guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with arresting the king's champion and the daughter of their lord. Taking advantage of their uncertainty, Thomas moved with lightning speed. His sword flashed out, not to strike but to knock Geoffrey's blade from his hand. The adviser cried out in pain as his weapon clattered to the stone floor. "Go," Thomas ordered Cecilia, backing toward the open crypt entrance. "I'll hold them here." But Cecilia had not survived in the world of court politics by being helpless. Seizing one of the heavy silver candlesticks from the altar, she hurled it at the nearest guard. It struck his helmet with a resounding clang, momentarily disorienting him. Thomas used the distraction to knock aside the second guard with the flat of his sword. Together, he and Cecilia retreated down the stone steps into the crypt, pulling the heavy altar partially back into place above them. In the pitch darkness below, Cecilia fumbled for Thomas's hand. "There are torches on the wall," she whispered. "And flint beside them." After a moment of searching, Thomas located them. The spark of flint illuminated his face briefly before catching the torch, which blazed to life with a smoky flame. The crypt stretched before them, ancient stone coffins lining the walls, the air heavy with the scent of earth and time. At the far end, a low archway marked the beginning of the escape tunnel. "They'll follow," Thomas said grimly, listening to the sounds of the altar being shoved aside above them. "The tunnel branches," Cecilia replied. "If we're quick, we can lose them." They hurried forward, the torch casting long shadows that danced macabrely across the tomb walls. Behind them, they could hear voices and the scrape of boots on stone steps. The tunnel beyond the crypt was narrow, forcing them to proceed in single file. Centuries of disuse had left it damp and crumbling in places, roots breaking through the ceiling in others. But the path remained clear enough to follow. As Cecilia had promised, the tunnel soon branched. Without hesitation, she took the right fork, pulling Thomas with her. "The left leads to the old monastery ruins," she explained as they hurried along. "This way takes us to the woods beyond the castle walls. We can circle back to the main gate from there." They continued in silence for several minutes, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The air grew fresher, suggesting they were approaching an exit. Finally, the tunnel ended at a crude wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Thomas handed Cecilia the torch as he put his shoulder to the weathered wood. It gave way with a groan of protest, revealing a small clearing in the forest beyond. They emerged into the cool night air, the castle visible as a dark silhouette against the starry sky some distance away. Thomas extinguished the torch in the damp earth, leaving only moonlight to guide them. "We need to return to the castle immediately," he said, his voice urgent. "The king must be told of Geoffrey's actions before he can spread any falsehoods." Cecilia nodded, gathering her skirts to allow for easier movement through the underbrush. "There's a path just ahead that leads to the main road. From there, we can approach the gates openly." As they made their way through the darkened forest, Thomas's hand found hers again, this time not from necessity but something deeper. Cecilia knew she should pull away. Proper ladies did not hold hands with knights in moonlit forests, but she found herself unwilling to break the connection. "You were magnificent back there," Thomas said quietly as they walked. "Few noble ladies would have shown such courage. Few noble ladies spend their childhoods exploring castle crypts," Cecilia replied with a small smile. Thomas chuckled, the sound warm in the night air. True enough. But still, you've proven yourself more than just Lord Winfield's daughter today. The king will hear of your bravery. They reached the edge of the forest, the castle road stretching before them, torches marking the main gate in the distance. Thomas reluctantly released her hand as they emerged onto the open road. Once we reach the king, stay close to me, he instructed. Geoffrey will try to discredit us both, but the treaty itself should prove our case. Cecilia's heart sank as she remembered a crucial detail. My father. Geoffrey will try to turn him against me, claim I've betrayed our house by interfering in matters of state. Thomas's expression softened. Your father loves you, does he not? In his way, Cecilia answered carefully. But he places great value on alliances and position at court. If the king's advisor names me traitor, then we shall ensure the king's champion names you hero first, Thomas said firmly. Come, our time grows short. They hurried toward the gate, the weight of what lay ahead hanging heavy between them. Cecilia knew that regardless of the outcome, her life at Rosenhill would never be the same after this night. For better or worse, she had stepped into the dangerous game of court politics, and there would be no returning to the simple peace of her garden. The great hall of Rosenhill Castle had fallen silent, the earlier festivities forgotten as King Edward sat in stern judgment upon his high seat. Before him stood Sir Geoffrey, his temple bandaged, his expression a mixture of defiance and calculation. Beside the king stood Thomas, the recovered treaty in his hands. Cecilia waited with her father to one side, Lord Winfield's face a mask of controlled fury. Whether that fury was directed at her or at Geoffrey remained to be seen. So, King Edward said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the hall. My trusted adviser claims he acted to protect the crown, while my champion accuses him of treasonous theft. A troubling matter indeed. The king turned his attention to the treaty in Thomas's hands. Show me this document that has caused such discord in my court. Thomas stepped forward, presenting the treaty with a respectful bow. King Edward unrolled it, his eye scanning the text carefully. After several long moments, he looked up, his gaze finding Geoffrey. This is indeed the treaty as I signed it, he declared. Unchanged and untampered with. Now, Sir Geoffrey, explain to me why you felt it necessary to remove it from my chambers and conceal it here at Rosenhill. Geoffrey straightened, his voice taking on the persuasive tone that had served him well in council chambers. Your Majesty, I have served you faithfully for 20 years. In all that time, my only concern has been the welfare of England and your crown. Answer the question, the king demanded. The treaty contains concessions to France that I believe are against England's interests, Geoffrey stated boldly. The Northern Territories are a small price to pay for peace, the king interrupted. A decision I made after months of careful consideration and counsel from all my advisers, including you, Geoffrey. I sought only to give your Majesty time to reconsider, Geoffrey insisted. The French envoys do not return for another month. There was time to negotiate better terms. So you stole a royal document and concealed it, then attempted to imprison the Lady Cecilia when she discovered your actions, Thomas interjected, his voice hard. Those are not the actions of a loyal servant. Geoffrey's eyes narrowed. The lady was trespassing in my chambers, breaking into my personal belongings. As for you, Sir Thomas, your own actions are questionable. Taking the word of a noble's daughter over the king's adviser, removing a royal document instead of bringing the matter directly to His Majesty, one might wonder where your true loyalties lie. Before Thomas could respond, Lord Winfield stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may speak. The king nodded his permission. My daughter's actions, while unconventional, were born of loyalty to the crown, Lord Winfield stated firmly. She has been raised to serve England and its king, as all my family has done for generations. If she erred in method, she did not err in intent. Cecilia looked at her father in surprise. She had expected condemnation, not defense. King Edward's stern expression softened slightly. Well spoken, Lord Winfield. And you, Lady Cecilia? What say you in your own defense? All eyes turned to her. Cecilia stepped forward, dropping into a deep curtsy before rising to meet the king's gaze directly. "Your Majesty, I discovered Sir Geoffrey's secret by chance," she began. "When I learned that a document vital to England's security had been stolen and hidden within my home, I could not stand idle. Rosenhill has stood as a bastion of loyalty to the crown for centuries. I would not see its stones shelter treachery." The king studied her thoughtfully. "You took a great risk confronting Sir Geoffrey alone." "I did what I believed right, Your Majesty," Cecilia replied simply. "As did Sir Thomas in helping me return the treaty to its rightful owner." King Edward nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to Geoffrey. "For 20 years you have counseled me wisely, Geoffrey. Your service has been valuable beyond measure. But this act, taking matters into your own hands, determining policy contrary to my expressed will, this I cannot overlook." Geoffrey's face paled. "Your Majesty, silence," the king commanded. "You are stripped of your position as royal advisor, effective immediately. You will return to your estates and remain there until I determine what further action to take." The hall remained deathly quiet as the weight of the king's judgment settled over the assembly. Geoffrey's shoulders slumped, the full impact of his fall from grace evident in his posture. "Sir Roland," the king continued, addressing one of his knights, "you will escort Sir Geoffrey to his chambers. He will depart Rosenhill at first light, under guard." As Geoffrey was led away, his once proud figure diminished by disgrace, the king turned to Thomas and Cecilia. "Sir Thomas, your loyalty to the crown is commendable, though your methods were unorthodox. In the future, I expect matters of state security to be brought directly to me." Thomas bowed deeply. "Of course, Your Majesty. I acted as I believed necessary in the moment." "And you, Lady Cecilia," the king continued. "Few in my court would have shown such courage or resourcefulness. England is well served by daughters such as you." Cecilia curtsied again, her cheeks warm with the royal praise. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I desire only to serve." The king smiled, the first genuine smile since the proceedings began. "Lord Winfield, you have raised a remarkable daughter. Perhaps we might discuss how her talents might be put to use in service to the Queen's household? My wife has need of ladies who possess both intelligence and discretion." Lord Winfield bowed, poorly concealed satisfaction on his face. "It would be the greatest honor, Your Majesty." With that, the king rose, signaling the end of the impromptu tribunal. "Let us return to our feast. Tonight we celebrate not only our host's hospitality but the loyalty of those who serve the crown truly." As the assembly dispersed, returning to their interrupted revelry, Cecilia found herself momentarily alone with her father. "You defended me," she said quietly. "I had thought you would be angry." Lord Winfield regarded her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part pride, part exasperation. "You acted foolishly," he said at last. "But bravely. And you have caught the king's attention in a favorable light." His stern countenance softened. "Your mother would have been proud." Before Cecilia could respond to this rare reference to her mother, Thomas approached, bowing respectfully to Lord Winfield. "My lord, might I have a moment with Lady Cecilia?" Lord Winfield studied the knight with shrewd eyes. "A brief one," he conceded, moving away to join the king's table. Once they were relatively private, Thomas turned to Cecilia, his expression serious. "You risked much tonight," he said softly. "As did you," she replied. "Your position with the king was at stake." "A position worth little if not used in service of truth," Thomas said. He hesitated, then continued more quietly. "When first I came to Rosenhill, I thought only of the treaty. Now I find myself thinking of gardens and secret passages, and the remarkable woman who knows them all." Cecilia felt her heartbeat quicken. "Sir Thomas, he corrected gently. After fleeing through crypts together, I think we might dispense with formalities, at least in private." A smile touched her lips. "Thomas, then. The king speaks of placing you in the Queen's household," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "My own duties keep me often at court. Are you suggesting we might see more of each other in London?" Cecilia asked, allowing a touch of teasing into her voice. "I am suggesting," Thomas replied carefully, "that I would very much like to show you the apple orchards of Ashcroft. They bloom magnificently in spring." The invitation was clear, not merely to visit his estates, but to consider a future where their paths might join permanently. Cecilia thought of her father's earlier plans for her marriage, plans that now seemed distant in light of the night's events and the king's favor. "I should like that," she said softly. "Though I would insist on bringing cuttings from my garden. Ashcroft sounds as though it might benefit from some Rosenhill roses." Thomas smiled, relief and joy lighting his features. "I can think of nothing that would please me more." In the background, the minstrels began a new song, and the sounds of the feast resumed its cheerful clamor. But in their quiet corner, Cecilia and Thomas remained a moment longer, two souls forged together in danger and trust, looking toward a future neither had imagined when the royal procession first arrived at Rosenhill's gates. The castle's ancient stones had witnessed many secrets over the centuries, and now they had witnessed the beginning of something precious and new, born in the hidden corners of enchanted gardens and shadowed chapels, where royal secrets had given way to matters of the heart.